Hi, I'm Ryan Lang, and welcome to the Art of Color and Light from CGMA. So this class is focused around, the art of color and light, how light interacts with color, value structures, and we're gonna use all these things to evoke emotions, which is basically what our job as concept artists. At the very basic level, we want people to look at an image and say, wow, that's cool. Or we want people to look at an image and think that's really sad or super happy. But whatever it is, we're always trying to evoke an emotion out of our audience. So over the course of the next 8 weeks, it's kind of what we're going to be learning how to do through the use of color and light. Now there's other elements that influence people's perception of things and emotions towards an image, and including shape language, music. There's a whole bunch of other cues, but we'll mainly center around color and light and values that come from that. So I guess a good way to start off is just to kind of look at some of my work and just give you a quick introduction of myself. So here's some work I've done, some characters from a book called Baltimore, Steadfast Tin Soldier and the Vampire. I was just kind of going after a really cartoony, like a cartoon modern kind of look. I think it's important to experiment with different looks. This is from my trainee work, or my work as a trainee, Hansel and Gretel. This was just kind of what we call a hero pose or a hero painting. Here's Gretel. Don't know why I drew a bucket, or painted a bucket, but there it is. I guess I didn't want to paint her other leg or something. I don't know. I cheated in some way. I know it. And this was the witch from that story, or at least my interpretation. Here's some moments. Speaking of evoking emotion from our audience, these paintings, these next couple of paintings, were done specifically with that in mind. I wanted to have a separation of environments, and I wanted a certain feeling to go with those. So, this is the beginning of the story. This is when Hansel and Gretel are lost in the woods, and it's this feels decidedly scarier than this. So it's you get a different emotional impact from the image, and then as the story goes, they walk through the forest, then they get to the witch's house, which is made of candy, and it's just basically everything a little kid wants. And so I tried to convey that with the colors here, but then maybe a little bit of ominous feeling over on this side, just kind of hinting at the possible danger in there, showing a contrast again between the forest and this seemingly happy spot. This is some work from Wreck-It Ralph, Game Central Station. This was a development piece to kind of just get across the finer details of the interior. I think they always knew they wanted it to be the inside of a power strip, but what does that look like? And obviously a power strip doesn't have all these little details in it. It has probably these plugs, but I had to kind of go in there and give it a lighting scheme reminiscent of Grand Central Station, some of those old photos, and that'll happen sometimes. People will say, well, we want this type of feeling. So you basically have to analyze an image and kind of take what you can from it and implement it into your image. Another moment, this was for I think it was supposed to be a first look, like an introduction, like it would be the first image released to the public, but they went with a 3D render, which was way better. Again, this is in Game Central Station, and just some of the characters, and the theme for this world was, it's all the video game characters tethered to the real world, so it has a little bit more realistic lighting, really kind of muted, going after that, the Grand Central Station feel, that bustling interior feel. Hero's Duty was one of the other worlds in Wreck-It Ralph, and this is a first-person shooter. It's supposed to be dark and grungy with a lot of contrast, muted colors. So this was a development piece for that. We had been working on this world, but this was one of the first images where we kind of just sat down and put everything together. An early Hero's Duty piece. Just never thought I'd be painting stuff like that at Disney. Another early piece. More Hero's Duty. You can see how much the color shifted. We got rid of all the warm colors and went for a cooler palette to really drive home the difference between Hero's Duty and what I'll show in a second, Sugar Rush. More Hero's Duty. Some tower ideas. You'll notice that it's pretty muted. I mean, and when I say muted, I mean the colors aren't strong. They aren't intense. They're more grayish. But then there's punches of color, like this green. And it's something we'll go over in a little bit. Another version of the tower. And this was an early development piece for Sugar Rush, so you get a certain emotion here and a certain emotion here, and they're hopefully very different. That's an early candy cane forest piece. Another early piece, and part of your job as a visual development or concept artist, people, they say, well, we want this candy world. What does it look like? And you sit down and say, I don't know. Let me figure it out. So, and part of figuring that out, along with the shape language, is the color and how light is interacting. More Sugar Rush. Early moment of Sugar Rush when Ralph first crash lands. And this was a moment where the race starts. This was one of the couple of matte paintings that I did, given really basic gray geometry, no textures, and this next one, everything green was actually 3D, and everything else is painted. This was another task that I kind of started getting into, which was I would do these paintings of these carts, these candy racer carts for Sugar Rush, and I really started getting into suggesting the materials, so and how light is interacting with those materials, which is again, it's another topic that we'll go over later in the class. Just kind of trying to get a different feeling of a different material. Another material study, this was for the interior of the volcano, and we wanted it to be chocolate. I don't think we ended up going with anything like this. They felt it was too melty, and I agree. But we really wanted to just kind of get across that this is chocolate, and how do you do that? And so I really had to look at a lot of reference of chocolate, and open up candy bars and see how peanut brittle and nougat and fudge and stuff worked. And yeah, I think I gained a couple pounds during this movie. This was a crash site, and it was just kind of looking at more material indication. This started off as a drawing by another artist, and I just went in and kind of did a look pass, just a painted pass, so that they knew modeling and texturing, or we call it look development, so they knew what materials to actually make this thing. Let me shrink this down just a little. These are small paintings that I do on my iPad sometimes, or Slate. Just kind of working on observational skills and trying to figure out what's happening with light and color, and they're fun little studies. And I super duper encourage people, if you have the means, it doesn't have to be digital, it can be traditional, it doesn't even have to be colored. You can just use black and white. But observing from nature is it's key. It helps inform your decisions when you're working on completely made up stuff. Get this just a little bigger. Let's do this. These were just a series of paintings I did on not an iPad, but on a slate. And so these are a series of images that I painted on a slate using Photoshop, and just kind of exploring different lighting scenarios and how they affect color. If you can believe it, this mountain range right here, this painting is literally this mountain range, but just to the side here, and it was just a different time of day, so you can see kind of the extremes of what happens to a color depending on the light and the atmosphere. Night painting. This was challenging. This was it's a really low key painting with a little bit of high contrast, a little light accent, and so I think that's about it for my little introduction. So let's move on to some basically what we're going to be doing for the next 8 weeks. I'll just kind of give you a quick rundown of what's going to happen. So we're going to start today. I'll just kind of give I'll give you the overview, and we'll talk about the use of color and light to tell a story. This first class will be pretty lecture heavy. There's not really a demo for this first class. It's just we're going to have a lot of concepts introduced on how to think about color. It's more about thinking about color and value and light this first class, and we'll get into lighting basics next class actually. But for the rest of this class, we'll talk about the role of lighting and value structures in design, and how we can evoke a certain emotion. You'll hear me say that a lot, evoke an emotion, because that's kind of like I said before, it's our job. We want awesome pictures to look at, but we also want to create a feeling. At the very least, this image that you see in front of you, hopefully it feels cold. And if it makes you feel a little cold and or makes you think of the cold and a little mysterious, awesome. It probably would have been better if I had, some other kind of character in here for a little bit more storytelling, but it's just a study. So for the rest of the class, we'll talk about all the value structures, and we'll also cover mood and story markers. That kind of ties back into the use of color and light to tell a story. And so next class will be lighting basics and relationship of colors. So that'll be a demo. Then we'll move on to materials. I think in addition to color and light and value structures, materials play a big role in defining your environment and evoking an emotion. Think of just really simply the desert versus a forest or a rainforest. The textures are completely different. There's waxy leaves in the rainforest and just dry sand in the desert, and rocks, and depends, I guess, what kind of desert you're in. But so after materials, we'll move on to color harmonies, and kind of how you can arrange colors together so that they're not competing with each other, and how colors can work together to create a mood. And we'll also go over creating focal points. This image is actually a bad example. There is no real focal point. If I had a person standing right here, that would probably be the focal point. But focal points are always good in an image, except when you're doing studies and you don't really need them. Then we'll move on to a little bit of color theory, and just kind of go into colors and the types of emotions they evoke, the kind of accepted ideas, and kind of how you can use color in context, meaning, a lot of people associate green with bad. If you think of Lord of the Rings, one of the towers is super green, and a lot of people think green, decay, death. But you can, judging how you use other colors in your story, in your art, you can actually make any color feel like a good color or a bad color. So we'll cover that. Then we'll move on to atmosphere and photographic light. Just talking about atmospheric effects and photographic effects, and kind of how we can trick people looking at our painting to think that it's a photo, because sometimes you may work for somebody and they'll ask for a final frame. So you want to kind of make something that tricks everybody that's looking at it thinking that it's actually a rendered image with lighting, and it doesn't necessarily have to be rendered, meaning all the tiny little brush strokes and stuff and everything super smooth, but just the effect of real photographic light. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll kind of put it all together and create a rough painting for an image, and then after that we'll take that image and refine it. So I'll show you some tips and magic tricks for just refining an image and kind of maybe not so much rendering it, but making it feel like it's completely done. So that's kind of in a nutshell. That's kind of what we're going to be doing over the next 8 weeks. So without any further ado, let's get started. Let's get rid of this real quick, and let's just start off with the design process. Whether you're making a movie or a video game or animated short, it usually breaks down into this. I mean, it might differ across the different type of storytelling disciplines, but more or less it's pretty much this. So design process and animation, what do you start with? Well, you kind of got to start with a story. You got to have kind of an aligning of things that happen. You're not just very rarely are you playing a video game just to see pretty things. You need a narrative somehow. And it's same thing with movies and animation. So story, a bunch of really super talented people are working on story and the intricacies of your characters and the situations that they're in. And so they'll work on that for a little while, and then once they kind of have the ball rolling, artists step in, other artists I should say, more visual development, concept artist people, and they do this stage called, some places it's called different, but it's a blue sky, and that's just kind of, it's really just the sky's the limit. You can pretty much do anything you want within reason to support the story, and this is where visual development and story are kind of going back and forth, and art is influencing story and story influencing art. So this is kind of, the story may have started, but now it's taking shape with the addition of art. And so after that, you kind of reach a stage called development, where the story is basically there. There's room for some things to come in, some ideas, some new ideas. But for the most part, story's pretty nailed out, and they're just going to be developing it, and you need to develop images to support the story. And so that's, coming up with color scripts, environments, trying to, here it comes again, evoke an emotion with a certain environment using a certain color palette and value structure. I mean, that's kind of, it's kind of the name of the game for a lot of viz dev. And so after development, after all these like paintings and everything's kind of figured out in the broad sense, then comes packaging, and that's anything from like orthographic views of characters to props. It's really, you've gone from really kind of informing story to informing the rest of production, modeling, look, lighting, texturing. So yeah, that's kind of the design process in animation. You could take some stuff out. Again, I mean, I was going to say you could take some stuff out depending on where you're working. It might be slightly different in games, or it might be slightly different in live action. So yeah, that's basically what we're going to be talking about. Is this whole class will basically be the kind of stuff that takes place. Oop, not there, sorry. There and there. Blue sky and development. It can translate a little into packaging, but a bulk of color, value structure, and lighting decisions are made during the blue sky and development stages. So that's just a really quick breakdown of design process. And I should mention that we're talking about light, color, and value, but there's other pieces to the puzzle of successful design, and it's shapes, overall design schemes. It's super intricate, and it's why it takes a bunch of people to make movies and games and stuff. I would say one person couldn't do it, but then somebody will just prove me wrong. So it's tough. So let's get into story. What do we need from story? I mean, we're painting pictures. We don't need to worry about story. Well, you wanna paint pictures that are illustrating the story. So yeah, you kind of need it. So what do you want to do? You want to establish the main story points. Anytime you look at a story, it's usually these are the most interesting points. They're the main points. Any kind of piece of concept art that you see for a movie, some guy jumping into a volcano or fighting a monster. These are main story points. And story points kind of address, the emotional. They are the emotional beats, and that's what you're going to want to learn how to identify. Major emotional beats. We'll go into it a little more. I'm going to use Red Riding Hood as an example, and for the image that you eventually paint for this class, it's up to you. Whatever your story you want. I don't want a whole bunch of people having a whole bunch of Red Riding Hoods and going out and trying to get jobs, and basically people competing with a Red Riding Hood in their portfolios. Do your own stories. Have fun with it. So you're gonna learn how to identify what the major emotional beats are. And what else do we want to do? We want to showcase the contrast of one location moment to another. We want to showcase, in other words, the contrast of emotion, of design. I find that it's a lot more pronounced in animation, just because everybody has, animation productions have a lot more control over everything that goes into the movie. I mean, think about it. They have to build everything. So live action, it's kind of, you can direct it to a certain degree, but I think the ultimate way to kind of harness the contrast is in animation. Not saying it's better, I'm just saying that is the ultimate way to control it. So how do we go about doing this stuff? I mean, how do we go about finding major emotional beats, and how do we go about making contrasts in emotion, and using the moment and the location? So, well, wouldn't be much of a teacher if I didn't address that right now. So brace yourself, because something's going to pop up, and it's a lot, but let me just break this down for you. Up here, I have the linear progression of a story, and we're using Red Riding Hood. Linear meaning, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on. Down here, I got this, this weird mathematical looking curvy thing. Looks like, I don't know, spaghetti. But the idea behind this is these are the emotional beats, the emotional progression during the story, and this will make more sense as I'm kind of going through this. So we start the movie with no real, I mean, when you start the movie, you haven't seen anything before or after, so it's kind of the emotional blank slate. So we start with Red Riding Hood at home. And so we'll just start off with, that's the median point. That's where everything is going to kind of be based off of, is this beginning point. So Red Riding Hood is super excited to go give Grandma her basket of goodies. So she, her emotion is up, and we want to reflect that with the audience. Now, you don't always have to have your image reflecting the character's emotions or the audience, but you have to pick one or the other. You have to have an image that says something. So Red starts her journey, and most times we want to see that as something positive. Like I said, she's giving Grandma her goodies. Maybe she hasn't seen Grandma in a while. She's super excited. It's awesome. So she moves into the forest, and the next emotional beat would probably be Red meets the wolf. She's meeting a giant wolf in the forest. That's kind of scary. And we want to show that. We want to show that the emotion has moved from happy and optimistic to kind of a little tentative. Maybe Red is oblivious to it, but we want the audience to feel a little afraid. So using color, light, value structures, we're going to start shifting that perception, that emotion. And so as the story goes, Red meets the wolf. She says, I'm going to Grandma's house. I'm going to give her cake and stuff. And the wolf says, hey, why don't you take a minute and go pick some flowers? So Red Riding Hood goes and picks some flowers, and while she's doing that, the wolf heads off to Grandma's. And so the reason I put this as an emotional beat is, the wolf is the enemy. He's the villain of the movie, and so he's going to Grandma's house. So the villain is going to some sweet little old lady's house. Well, that's even a little more dangerous, So what happens next? Well, wolf eats Grandma. That's pretty bad. Most people like their grandmas. Most people don't want to see them eaten by wolves. And so we have like this, this pretty low point. And if you look back at, as during the duration up until this point, this is the lowest point. Grandma getting eaten by a wolf. We have a low point, and what we're going to do now is we're going to contrast it because Red arrives. And so we have this huge difference in emotion right here, and this would be prime to kind of show as an illustration. And why is this positive? Well, Red arrives at Grandma's house, and she's oblivious to the wolf. Now the audience could be, biting their nails or whatever, freaking out and saying, don't go in there, don't go in there. But Red is super excited. So we kind of have this high point, and we're going to contrast it again with a low point. What happens after Red goes in? There's that little spiel about what big eyes you have, Grandma, and after that, the wolf eats her. And so we've just killed the main character. That is a low point. We like Red. We're supposed to like Red. So her dying is kind of a bad thing. But what happens? A hunter shows up in the middle of the woods, and he ends up cutting open the wolf and freeing Grandma and Red Riding Hood, who have miraculously survived. So that is, you're just eaten by a wolf, and then you're let free, and you're alive, and it's awesome. So that's the best thing that could have happened. It's great. So if you look back at these emotional beats, you really do have some big jumps happening. We have something here. This is kind of, every day. Okay, I'm eating cereal. This is, hey, I'm pretty excited. I'm going